Hi. Today, we're reviewing The Shucked Oyster. Now, we couldn't afford to pay Ben Milton for a review, so today we're doing the next best thing and reviewing The Shucked Oyster ourselves as Ben Milton. I'm not Ben. This isn't Questing Beast. Welcome to Black Lodge Games. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to go and give you a full overview and mini review of our own product, The Shucked Oyster. The Shucked Oyster is a module. It is meant for use explicitly with Shadowdark, but can be easily adapted to basically any old school role-playing game. If you're using an OSR system like ACKS or ACKS II, there is an explicit conversion guide for that at the end of this book, and we will talk about that when we get to it. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what this actually is and how to use it, because it's not really your standard adventure path or module with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's not meant to be a kind of linear story for your characters and your players to just plod through and accept the content as it comes in the order it's meant to arrive. Really, this is an engine of chaos. This is a book that is meant to shake up your campaign, and it kind of respects the full game of Shadowdark in terms of that it's not meant to divert you or reinvent what that game is about. It's very much still about dungeon crawling and going out on those adventures, raiding tombs, doing all of that. And there are 3 dungeons in this book for you to actually engage in that. But we kind of look at old school role-playing and even really modern role-playing games in a fantasy setting as being kind of limited by this loop. A lot of people tend to kind of ignore the kind of more interesting things that can be going on in your town. So the assumption that we're working on is that you are playing a game like Shadowdark and that you are pursuing the kind of dungeon delving loop over and over again. And this isn't meant to take over. It's not meant to supplant that in any way. It's meant to slot in and just add something really, really interesting and weird into that loop. So when you come back to town, something's going on at town. As you can see here, we have a beautiful cover that was done by the Basic Expert. He's a fantastic artist, gave us exactly what we asked for, which was this sort of ode to Frazetta, where we have Madame Vice, who's the kind of queen of the cat house, the madam of the brothel, standing over its burned wreckage, surrounded by these prostitutes who don't know what to do, and in the background, 2 of our legendary monsters that appear and are fully detailed in the book. The brothel itself, that is what the Shucked Oyster is a brothel, is a location that you put into your campaign, into your main city or town, wherever your characters are kind of based out of, and it's meant to just kind of sit in the background and draw your players in over time through its weird kind of web of intrigue with all of these characters that are connected through a single location. Now, this brothel is cursed. This entire thing, it's a world that is going to add something to your world that you don't have, which is this kind of dark surrealism. One of my players, while we were playing, kind of explained that, we're doing this like really serious, like Game of Thrones, like politicking, everyone's stabbing each other in the back. And then anytime that we encounter something from the Shucked Oyster, it's like we go to the other side of town and there's this like weird, surreal, like David Lynch movie going on, which is exactly what we were going for. Everyone who's used the Shucked Oyster so far has had wildly different results with it. It plays out differently every single time, and that is by design. And so this brothel, the Shucked Oyster, is cursed. The reason that it's burned down on the cover is because it faces calamities over and over and over again. It burns down all the time, and it's going to burn down in your campaign. Whether you want it to or not, it will happen, and it will probably happen multiple times, and we'll go over exactly how that goes. But just wanted to give a little kind of overview of what this is before we dive in. Like I said, it's not a linear adventure path. It's really meant to, the meat of this are the NPCs that are in here, because we have more than 36 NPCs, 12 patrons of the Shucked Oyster that are complete just weirdos and deviants that all have conflicting motivations and goals, and they all have connections to each other. They have connections to the 20 prostitutes that work at the Shucked Oyster, and there's a few more characters here and there that we'll talk about as we as we go through. But the thing is, each character has like at least one connection to another character. And that other character has connections to other characters. And so they're kind of arranged in this web of intrigue where every one of them has different alliances, different people that they want to protect or harm. So if you get involved with any of these characters, if you help any of them, if you harm any of them, you're going to create enemies no matter what. So your players are just going to kind of do things, and they're going to get drawn into this weird web of conspiracies and have all sorts of enemies and allies from nowhere, and it's going to really shake things up. So to go through this is, if I had to say, what is this product like? It is closer to something like a city source book from Vampire the Requiem or Vampire the Masquerade. City of the Damned New Orleans, we explicitly list in the opening section where we give kind of a little introduction and talk about some of the inspirations we had. But these were kind of modules that were much more focused on characters, NPCs, motivations, and they produce a very interesting and different sort of game. And like I said, we're not trying to force Shadowdark or any D&D game into being something different, but there's an element of this style of game that I think that a lot of D&D players have never really experienced, or they haven't had that really be the kind of the focus. And so the Oyster itself will bring your characters into that style of game bit by bit until it kind of draws them in to the point where they can't resist any longer and they have to really start pursuing things. But this is still very much an adventure game, and there are many adventures to be had within it. So if we take a look at this, this is a printing from Drive-Thru RPG. We do have a version available through Mixam as well, both hardcover and softcover, and I will be going over those towards the end of the video. You can check the timestamps if you want to see the differences there, but we're going to look at the Drive-Thru version since this is the one that our Kickstarter backers got. Thank you so much to the Kickstarter backers, by the way. Oh my gosh, you guys really helped us make this thing incredible. But the book itself is also filled with incredible art. We have on almost every page. I mean, there's over 100 pieces of art. We have artists like William McAusland. If I'm saying your name properly, I'm sorry if I've butchered that. Dean Spencer. William McAusland is someone who worked on Shadowdark itself. There's a couple of pieces by Carlos Castillo. We've used public domain pieces as well, some of which we're going to be releasing as publisher resources on Drive-Thru so you can use them. And there's many, 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 many others. But you can see there's just gorgeous pieces on almost every single page. So it was a lot of fun putting this together, and we put a lot of love into it, and there is just a million pieces. It's awesome. I'm really, really happy with the way it came out. But how do you actually use this thing? Since I said it's not really like, there's not okay, this is the opening encounter and this is what you do. We go through and kind of tell you how to use this. We give an introduction as to kind of what this is and how to use this. And basically it's that we assume you have your own town or your own city that you're already operating out of. Your characters, your PCs, they're going out on adventures, they're raiding tombs, they are pursuing their own goals and doing things in the wilderness. And when they come back to town, a lot of times town is used as like a gas station to just fill up on hit points or gear, maybe do a little bit of carousing. And so we wanted to use the mechanics within Shadowdark itself to kind of draw you into this other style, these other things that RPGs have to offer. And so to do that, we use kind of an expansion of the social mechanics that already exist in Shadowdark. Shadowdark uses a 2d6 reaction roll, or reaction check as it's referred to in the core rulebook, for purposes of determining like monster hostility. When you get into an encounter in a dungeon or in the wilderness, generally you're going to roll 2d6 and then consult this tiny little chart in the core rulebook that'll tell you kind of what's the attitude of the monster. Is it friendly? Is it hostile? Is it neutral towards you? And a lot of other OSR games and old school games have taken this and used this as a more generalized social mechanic. And so we kind of suggest that you do that here as well. So anytime that your characters, your party encounters a new NPC, use a reaction check to see what they're doing. Add your charisma bonus, or if you're trying to intimidate, maybe do like a strength bonus, something like that, and see what the result is. And that gives you kind of just the attitude of how that NPC sees you. It's a really great tool as a GM to kind of guide your own roleplay as you're roleplaying all these other characters. But we take this a step further with what we are calling the Total Oyster modifier. Now, the Total Oyster modifier is basically just a bonus or penalty that's going to get added to the result of every single reaction check that you do when you're interacting with the prostitutes at the Shucked Oyster. And yes, these are referred to as prostitutes and whores and strumpets throughout the text. This is not modern sex work where we're all just talking about how wonderful everything is, and it's not. The Shucked Oyster is a cursed, awful place. It is not somewhere you want to work. The woman who runs it, who you'll see on the following pages, Madame Vice, is evil. She's not a good person. This is a place of misery. But when you use the Total Oyster modifier, it basically is sort of a way to simulate your reputation with the ladies of the oyster. So if you do things that impress them, it's going to go up. Do things that don't endear you to them, then that bonus is going to go down. You just keep a tally of this throughout the game. It's very easy. It's one single number that you're tracking the entire time, and it can swing positive or negative basically infinitely. There's no limit to how high or low it can go. And what this does is when you run into the prostitutes, it's going to swing their behavior very radically, very quickly, just by interacting with different characters. Even if you're not directly interacting with the prostitutes, you're going to start accumulating penalties and bonuses, and it's going to swing their behavior very, very quickly in strong directions. Because the thing is, we didn't want this to feel balanced. We wanted it to be weird, and we wanted it to be extreme. So the prostitutes are going to get angry at you. They're going to fawn over you, and all of these things. And your fortunes are going to change very, very quickly. And there's a way in which it changes radically, and we'll get to that. So you never get stuck in a rut of always having positive interactions or always having negative interactions. It's always going to be changing, and it's a lot of fun, and it really adds a lot of flavor and spice to your campaign. So we explain how this works basically. And if you'll notice, pretty much everything in here, like we have the TOM acronym in bold. If you're using this PDF, all of the bolded text, whether it's, the Total Oyster modifier, or especially if it's going to be the name of an NPC, all of that is internally linked in the PDF. So if I click on Deadeye Gormax or Madame Vice, it's just going to take me directly to that entry. So it makes it very, very easy to use at the table if you're using like an iPad or a computer. On the next page, we kind of explain what I've just said is that this isn't really a linear adventure. It's more of a chaos generator. And we do have a note on handling sex. While this is a brothel, we are not using the brothel as a means to roleplay sex or get into, really adult content in that sort of a sense. The brothel itself is a premise for you to jump off of and use for this creative chaos and these new amazing adventures you can go on. So when handling sex, we basically just say, just be normal. We know we can't stop you if you want to make this a literal brothel simulator, but that's not actually the point. And like I said earlier, the brothel's going to burn down. So the location itself, the building, is not super important. It serves as a nexus for all of this intrigue. That's the point. But going on, you get kind of a little brief history. You get your first two NPCs, Madame Vice and Peter O'Malley. Madame Vice is the founder of the Shucked Oyster. She is a bitch, and she's super fun to roleplay. She's always smoking cigars and just trying to keep everyone as miserable as possible. Father Peter O'Malley is her biggest critic in town. He's a complete drunk and just a total weirdo, and they hate each other. They absolutely hate each other. As we move on, we basically tell you where to put this. Shadowdark functions in a pretty interesting way. If you actually use the rules in Shadowdark, it's great. It has all these tools for generating, hex maps and dungeon maps, but also cities and towns. And so if you follow those rules, you're going to end up with cities and towns that have different districts in them, whether it's an artisan district or a mercantile district, or sometimes like a castle district, a university district, that sort of a thing. All you got to do is pick one of those districts on your map and then place the Shucked Oyster as a point of interest. And then instead of using the random encounter tables that are provided in the Shadowdark book for the Artisan District, you use the encounter tables that we have for the Shucked Oyster. And we'll get to those in a moment, but those are really crazy, and it's a way of getting your players involved organically. You don't have to shove this down your players' throats. In fact, you really shouldn't. That's not how this is meant to function. It's really just meant to draw them in and add some spice in town. Eventually, that spice is going to snowball, and it's going to become so interesting that they can't ignore it. But it's meant to just be there. It's not meant to interrupt the rest of the game. you go on adventures, you come back to town, you go on adventures, you come back to town. It also gives you a little bit, tells you a bit about the layout of the oyster. The oyster itself does not have a map because the oyster itself burns down all the time, and it's different every single time it's rebuilt because the prostitutes are the ones building the brothel every time. Madame Weiss is cracking her whip, and these ladies are working double shifts, street walking, and rebuilding this like ramshackle building. So it gives you a lot of freedom to go with that, and gives you a little information about what's going on in the basement, which, shocker, Madame Weiss is not exactly the most upstanding citizen. But it does also function as a carousing location. And in Shadowdark, the carousing mechanics are a way for, in the early levels, to gain some more experience and get new plot hooks and things like that, spawn new adventures. And it's brilliant. We absolutely love that. That's actually the thing that inspired us to make this entire supplement. So we have a carousing table, and it just functions exactly like the regular Shadowdark carousing mechanics. You come in, you choose something off of the menu, what you're doing to party. And these are all kind of funny names of the services offered by the actual prostitutes that are all listed later in the book. You put in either individually or as a group how much gold you want. This gives you a bonus to the D8 roll that you make on the carousing outcome. But on top of that, you add the total oyster modifier, that thing we were talking about earlier that shifts the behavior of the ladies. You add that bonus or penalty to your D8 roll. So say I had a total oyster modifier of +5, plus 5, and I did 100 GP, so I get a +1. So I'm going to roll my D8. It's also off the wood, no good. I got a 2. I got a 2 plus my 1 because I put in 100 GP. That would usually give me a result of 3. But since I had a +5 on the total oyster modifier, that brings it up to an 8, which is a significantly better outcome. I get 4 additional experience points and a magic item that I've stolen from Garfunkel the Wise. Now, Garfunkel the Wise is one of the patrons of the oyster. So if you go to his entry, you're going to have all sorts of interesting things about this character. It'll give you a lot to role play with, and now you've got them involved in the different kind of plot hooks associated with Garfunkel the Wise. In this case, you humiliated Garfunkel the Wise in a contest of wits. Now, if it was negative, instead of getting a 3, I would have had a -1. And, 1 or lower, I would have run into one of the monsters that populates the Shucked Oyster. One of the prostitutes is a Medusa, and she removes her veil, and you become petrified, and you need a restoration spell. You still gain 2 experience, but now you know there's a monster in the brothel, of which there are more than one. Spoiler warning. So the Tom manages to really skew the results of this, but we don't want you to get stuck with that. So the Tom actually inverts. It goes from a +5 after whatever this party is that you did. You had such a wild time. The prostitutes loved you before. Now they hate you. Now your total oyster modifier is a -5. So every time that you run into them next, their behavior has changed. You run into any of these prostitutes, which you will, you'll run into many of them, they're going to hate you now. And if you come back and you carouse again, it'll flip. You shouldn't tell your players this, so they can't really game it. They shouldn't even know about the total oyster modifier. What this is supposed to do is basically give you the opportunity to role play out the chaotic nature of these catty women who, they gossip a lot, and they're kind of the mercurial nature that they have. And so this allows you to flip that a lot. It's a lot of fun to do that. And so when your players get a low roll and they get some huge result off of it, they're going to be like, whoa, this place is awesome. Let's come back. Next time they come back, they might get a really low roll. And they're going to be like, what is going on at this place? And the way that they get drawn in is through our encounters. And this is going to tell you that we have a couple of lists of predefined encounters to get you involved. There are 2 kind of world states for the Shucked Oyster. Either it is still standing, it's open for business, everything's going on as usual, or it is catastrophically burned to the ground. We have 2 separate random encounter tables that you use for those world states. We have a before it burns encounter table that has a list of all of these different things, and you'll see that there's a lot of names here that are bolded. And again, all of this is internally linked in the PDF. But each one of these characters, you run into them. Something happens. Like, let's see if I roll a D100 and see what happens on this table. I rolled a 29. So for a 29, I run into someone named Pleasant Peter. Pleasant Peter is wheeling his corpse wagon through the street. This is going to get you involved with this character who's rather important. And we encourage you to actually read read all of the NPCs before just bringing this into the game. Read all of the entries because, like I said, they all have these conflicting motivations, these networked relationships and things like that. And you'll know how to roleplay them. You'll know what to do in these situations. But there's a lot of crazy stuff that can happen. Like if I rolled 35, that's going to give me Gaston, who is one of my favorite characters, is agreeing loudly with his sentient sword, Coward's Bane. This will mean nothing to you until you read these entries, but this is going to give you a lot of fun and a lot of things to do in your game because Gaston is a very interesting and very motivated character. After it burns down, you'll use this random encounter table. It's the exact same mechanic. Your characters enter the district where the Shucked Oyster is. After it's burned down, you roll on this encounter table. I rolled a 41 in this case. 41. A ghoul crawls out of the wreckage of the Shucked Oyster. This is going to give you an indication there's something else going on here. This is not entirely normal. This is a more dangerous encounter table. Although to be honest, if you roll a 1 or a 100, you're running into Mungo Borlov, who's a legendary monster. You can just kind of run into like Strahd basically on the street, which is hilarious and awesome. And he's a character who has motivations and you can role play him, and he's not necessarily just it's not just a combat encounter. This is an opportunity for you to role play and to get your players involved in the weirdness of the Shucked Oyster. If I rolled a 60, that's going to give me Agnes is sleepwalking and descends into the rubble of the oyster. Agnes is one of the prostitutes of the Shucked Oyster. So I wonder, is there something under the Shucked Oyster? Can't imagine. And now we have instructions for how do you actually kick off the fire? There's 2 ways. Basically, if your players don't want to go to the Shucked Oyster, they don't, they have some encounters, they don't really bite, but they're going out into the wilderness and they're coming back to town. Every time that they come back to town, you're going to roll 1d4. And on a result of 4, you are going to burn the oyster. And what that's going to instruct you to do is do 2 things, possibly 3, depending on the results. But there's 2 major tables that you're going to be rolling on. The first is for you, which is going to be what caused the fire on this page. You're going to roll a d10. I got a 5. So in this case, I determined that the cause of the fire is an object fell from the heavens and ignited the rooftop. And every single line on that table has a keyed entry that actually tells you what's happening. And what's happening sometimes can affect the total oyster modifier and the way in which your players react to it. But this one, the what caused the fire, this is objectively what actually happened. What actually caused the fire, not what do people think caused the fire. And there's a couple of different things. You have calamity, a prostitute started the blaze. This means if you go to that entry, it's going to tell you to roll on the prostitutes table, find out who rolled it, who actually burned it down. There's another where it could be one of the patrons did it, I believe. However, these results almost never match up with the second roll you make, which is the blame and shame table. So when you go ahead to the next sequence, you're going to find out who is the town blaming for this disaster. And sometimes they might blame a prostitute, they might blame a patron, they might blame you if you get an 8 on here. There's all sorts of different things. And so these 2 things, the actual objective cause and who they blame, almost never match up. And so this already gives you a lot to work with in terms of just creating a mystery. And it's different every single time. And like I said, it's going to burn down multiple times throughout the campaign. So you get a lot of reuse out of these things, and you're never going to get the same combination twice. However, there is a second way that you can burn down the Shucked Oyster, which is if you roll sufficiently high on this table, on the carousing outcomes, the oyster burns. Anything that's a 9 or higher, every time, burn the oyster, burn the oyster, burn the oyster. You party so hard that something causes the oyster to burn. And again, when you burn the oyster, you're going to go and roll on these tables and find out what it is. So your players, if they choose to carouse there, it's possible that they're going to essentially trigger this world state change of the oyster burning down. But if they ignore it even and come back from the wilderness, they're going to cause it to burn down. And so the same thing with the blame table. Each one has a keyed entry that tells you maybe you'll have to roll on another table. Like if a prostitute started the fire, you would consult the table on page 86. And if we go there, it's going to give you the list of all the prostitutes who work at the brothel. And this will determine who actually, is being blamed. And then depending on how your players treat this, if they just allow the town to berate this person, or if they stick up for them, that's going to give them bonuses and penalties on the total oyster modifier, because the prostitutes are going to see you differently based on your actions. And so there's a bunch of different ways, things that people can be blamed, and all of your actions kind of affect those outcomes with the total oyster modifier, which will further impact how the prostitutes interact with you, but also how your carousing outcomes work. And so it just adds tons and tons of variety through these kind of linked tables. Now, the next two sections of the book, this is the meat. This is really, really the stuff that's going to matter the most. And this is the list of the patrons and the prostitutes. The patrons, we have 12 of them. These are all super bizarre weirdos. They're very fun. Some of them have a very serious tone to them. And that's something you'll notice in this. This is a very dark, but very comedic supplement. It's going to make your players laugh. It's made me laugh. I laughed a lot while we were writing it. But there's also a lot of legitimately kind of dark stuff in here, which is great because you get some pathos and some relief with the comedy. It's not simply, like a misery simulator or something like that. And it's definitely not meant to play that way. But you have these very, very weird characters. And each NPC, like we have Garfunkel the Wise here, has a significant word count dedicated to them. So you get a lot about their history, about their motivations, about their connections to other characters, their goals and motives. And throughout all of these, you're going to notice that each of the NPCs is tied to each other in different ways. Not every NPC is tied to every NPC. They're usually tied to one or two other people, but these are always almost in one direction, So someone like Demetrius Bucco on this page, who's the local lord, or a local lord in your setting, is tied to Jasper Cunningham. But he's also got some other ties, like to Mungo Borlov, because this guy's keep is out on the Borderlands, and he's noticing that there's a lot more undead walking around. Now, Mungo Borlov, as you'll see listed on the table, is an eccentric aristocrat from the mountains who is definitely not obviously a vampire. Completely obviously a vampire. So you've got connections there. Archibald Brackmeyer. This is another... This guy's so weird. He's this kind of fop who lives out in the woods, and he sells flowers in town, whether it's for funerals or anything. And he is connected to Calliope the Medusa, but he also knows some of the secrets about Madame Vice. And some of these characters, they have, and we have a note here, that they have other locations described that are associated with them. Like Archibald has, this crazy hedge garden out in the middle of the woods that's like mystical and has, there's this kind of fey element to it. That's meant for you as a GM. That's a hook for you to expand on. Some locations will be detailed in this book, but there's more out there that can really be just a prod to your imagination to take things in your own direction, come up with new adventures, new locations, and new dungeons. And we highly recommend using the Shadowdark rules for creating those locations. We used the Shadowdark rules for creating pretty much everything in this book. We populated our dungeons for the most part using the dungeon population rules. It's a fantastic little game. We absolutely adore it. But you've got characters like Gaston. Gaston is cartoonishly masculine to the point where he makes his namesake Gaston from Beauty and the Beast just look like a complete wimp. And he's come back. He's a max level fighter, adventurer who's gone out adventuring. He's basically conquered everything he could possibly conquer. And he's come home because he's decided it's time to find a woman. But he's got really high standards, because his testosterone is, probably 2,500, maybe more. He's looking for the right woman. And the right woman for him has to have a charisma of 18 or more. If you have less than an 18 charisma, he's just not going to notice you. I'm sorry, ladies. And this actually happened in our game. One of our characters is a witch who has all sorts of glamours and everything. And she has a charisma of 17, and she's known for being, extremely, like buxom and attractive and hot. And when she went and knocked on his door, because the players became extremely obsessed with this character. And he opened the door, looked at her, and just went, no. And she gasped. The player gasped at the table. She was like, what? And I looked over to my writing partner, Nick, who's also, credited but not speaking on this video. And we were just instantly like, oh my God, yeah, it's working exactly as intended. So anyone who has a 17 charisma or lower is going to be ignored by him. Any woman. Now, any woman that has more than 17 charisma is going to become the object of his obsession, and he will not leave her alone. And things are going to escalate and escalate and escalate. So much so that there's an expansion to this in the Further Adventures chapter at the end. But he's a really, really fun character. And again, this is the type of thing where it's like, all you have to do is run into him and talk to him. And if the conditions are right, he's going to be in your campaign and he's going to become very important very fast. But he'll do all sorts of things to try and win this young woman's heart, doing things like clearing the next dungeon she's headed to before the party arrives. They receive no experience. He'll greet them at the entrance where he's stacked the heads of all the monsters already. He'll start and win fights in public with strangers in front of her. He'll send her opulent flowers from Archibald Brackmeyer and cakes from Barnaby Fumblebutter. These are two other characters you have connections here. And eventually, he'll try to take her to Archibald's cottage. You've got Ulrich the Despoiler, who is the most hated man in town. He's one of my favorite characters. And you have Barnaby Fumblebutter, who's the most loved man in town, who is solely responsible, unknowingly, for keeping the social fabric of the town from falling apart in a very, very bloody and violent way. So you'll need to read about him to find out what that is. Deadeye Gormax, you have this Cyclops who is specializes in archery, but he started in adventuring school. He's got ties to the before time, 30 years ago, before the Shucked Oyster was founded by Madame Weiss. So he's got some interesting information you might want to find out. Cromworth Barleystein, oh my God, I love this guy. He is a true villain. Not in the way that you think, but just a complete a moral disaster. Mondopoulos Gangler is by far my favorite character in the entire thing, but I can't spoil that for you. Pleasant Peter is an amateur taxidermist and also the grave digger of the town. And he has lots of connections to lots of different people. And then, of course, we have Mungo Borlov. Mungo Borlov is old. He is, in fact, a vampire. He is a legendary monster, and you can run into him in town just at night. It's pretty awesome. He has a whole lot of connections as well, and opportunities for big adventures for you to do outside of the Shucked Oyster as well. Again, this is one of those things where we wrote this so you can use this as inspiration and a jumping off point. And then we have the Ladies of the Oyster, and similarly, they all have connections to everyone, but each one of them has a one-page spread. So they have a little bit less word count, but they are integrally important to how all of this plays out. And so any character that you help or harm is going to trigger involvement with other characters. And so it really will snowball and escalate until your party is so interested that they will have to do something about all of these loose plot hooks. Now, you'll notice that some of the prostitutes have little symbols next to your name, and some of them don't. So Bronwyn is just a regular old person. She doesn't have any special characteristics. She's basically, for all intents and purposes, a level 0 peasant. She is not a character with a class. She's not a monster. Any of the prostitutes that have this little pentagram, they are a monster in hiding. They are not a normal person. The brothel is a dangerous and weird place that attracts dangerous and weird people. There are also some, though, that have this little symbol, this little cross next to them. They are also special. They may not have a class, they still may have, for all intents and purposes, level 0 characteristics, but they are different. And that's all explained a bit later when you get to what's really going on at this brothel, because this isn't just a wacky place. There is something sinister going on. There's multiple sinister things going on all at the same time related to the brothel. And there's a lot to uncover for your players. And all of this stuff, all of these little threads we've been talking about between the different characters are meant to pull them into this darker set of conspiracies. This Shucked Oyster is not a normal place. So after these two sections, we have a section of NPC stats that basically any of the characters that are like a leveled character with a class or they're a monster, you'll have their abilities and all their statistics here for you. The exception, of course, is Mungo, who has his own full spread because he is a legendary monster. After this, we go over the magic items that have already been mentioned in the previous sections in the details that you'll find out about. Coward's Bane, this is Gaston's sentient sword. It's so awesome. Finally, we get to the sections that are really the more important adventuring content. This is not just going to be wacky encounters and getting involved in little, social disputes and whatnot. There is something evil going on in this town under the surface of everything. You have this demon worshipping cult, which you get its full history, its rise, its current state. You get a full dungeon for their hideout, and we'll skip through a lot of this. They're fairly extensive. I think it's like 19 rooms. Yeah, 19 room dungeon. It's all tied into a lot of the different characters. There's a bunch of stuff that can go on. We have random encounters for the dungeon, of course. It tells you also in the description the kind of level of danger that it has. So this is a risky dungeon for purposes of random encounters. After this one, we have Malchimpus himself, which is our second legendary monster. Again, this is an original piece by the basic expert. And then we get to the actual truth of the oyster. This is a section that is going to tell you all of the details, the secret history, what's going on, and what they can actually uncover. How to deal with their curses, the curse associated with it, and then what's literally beneath the oyster, which is another dungeon with random encounters, full room descriptions, all sorts of cool stuff to find. Again, both dungeons point to different places and tell you, there's further adventures and more stuff to encounter and find. Tons of treasure, lots of magic items, very important stuff, full of great art. And then after that, we have a further adventures section. Now, this is going to be stuff. The meat of everything is in all of these previous pages. You have all of these dungeons. You have these two dungeons. You have all of these characters with all of their schemes and motivations. And it's many, 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 many sessions worth of material in this. We've been running the Shucked Oyster in our home campaign since, like May, maybe April, is when we first introduced it. It's still going. By this point, they've cleared all the dungeons, they've uncovered most of the big secrets, but they've only interacted with a handful of the characters. And this is the thing, you don't need to use all of these characters. Just like you don't need to shove the Shucked Oyster down your players' throats, you don't have to use all of the characters, just the ones they run into and the ones that end up becoming important. And they will become important because your players will choose who is important, who are the ones that are, unless, of course, they kill someone and they've made an enemy and now that enemy is going to be forced to retaliate, things of that nature. But the further adventures are basically expansions. It's what if certain situations happen? Like, what if you decide to really get into the Mungo aspect of this, Mungo Borlov, the vampire? And what would it look like to go and find his castle and deal with his brides and all of that? And this is something we are going to expand on in a future supplement. But this is, again, we give you the inspiration of kind of the direction we're going with this, but not to wait. If this is something your players really bite on, you have all the tools, not only here, knowing how this kind of like relationship network thing is mapped to kind of recreate a new version of that in this different region, but you have all the tools in the Shadowdark RPG core rulebook to go and make dungeons and populate them with all sorts of treasure and all sorts of monsters and traps and all that stuff. And so it's a jumping off point for you, and we give you some inspiration and direction. And again, these are pretty meaty. Gaston and the Castle of Courage, it's like, well, what if Gaston decides to leave or kidnaps that female PC and tries to force her to marry him? Where does he live? He, of course, lives in a country called Goodland, which he founded, in the Castle of Courage, where he lives. And it details his enemies and what's this region like. And it's like you could create an entire new sandbox region out of this and go and do adventures with Gaston and fight Kazam the Black Sultan, Karn Sklevelbolg, and the last one, the Creature, which is great. What happens if that demon, Malchimpus, escapes, gets out, and is just running amok in the world? What are the things he's going to do? We give you inspiration for that. What if Mondopolis, the person that I said was my favorite character, what if he starts doing the really weird things that he does and it escalates out of control? You can run with that. Hildegard, who's one of the prostitutes, is a very, very smart lady, and she's got designs of her own. All of them do. Some of them, not much going on upstairs, but some of them are quite capable and have plans, Hildegard in particular. What happens if Demetrius Bucco dies? This is what happens if one of the NPCs dies is also a very interesting question, because your players are probably going to kill a lot of them, and over time, at least mine did. Mine have killed most of them that they have met in very hilarious ways, but not everybody that dies in the Shucked Oyster, and you'll find this in the secrets of the Shucked Oyster, but not everybody who dies at the Shucked Oyster is content to stay dead, which is its own kind of hook to get them back in. It's a lot of fun. After that, we have the Appendices. These are going to be stretch goals that we had from the Kickstarter. The first one, Appendix G for Garfunkel, is Garfunkel has his own dungeon that's referenced in his entry. So we actually, that originally was going to be one of those locations that you could expand on, but people wanted more. So we made the stretch goal, and we have an entire new dungeon that Garfunkel has put together that is worthy of his moniker, The Wise. After that, we have Appendix H for Madame Vice's humidor, because she's always smoking cigars. But these are not regular cigars. They all have their own special little quirks and benefits and drawbacks, and they're all very fun and very funny. And then we have Appendix R for rival crawlers. This is another stretch goal content that had people submitting their own characters, and we kind of took their concepts and worked them into a way that was compatible with the kind of dark, comedic, surrealist tone of this. So you've got Beast Slayer and Sons, aka the Beast Slayers, run by Morris Beast Slayer. I think his name was Bestschlager in our campaign. But these are all these kind of weirdos that are adventurers of ill repute that you can run into. And they are actually on the random encounter tables. You can run into the rival crawlers. In one of the dungeons, you can run into the rival crawlers as a random encounter, as well as in the before and after the fire tables. You can run into them in town. And so you don't have to make up rival crawlers on the spot, although you can using the tools that are in the Shadowdark core book. But you've got a bunch of different characters. So this is an additional, I think, 6 characters. Yeah, an additional 6 characters, much shorter write-ups than the full ones, but they have personality, and they're a lot of fun. They're very, very funny. Oh, 7. That's right. There was a 7th one. It's Horpos Whipplezipple. Someone claiming to be something called a gnome. Very, very fun. But then we had Appendix T. We had another stretch goal that was reached, which was Cromworth Barleystein's Tavern. This is an additional carousing location. It has more hooks, more things going on. It tells you, there's different events and things that can happen, and its own carousing outcomes table. Now, you don't apply the Tom to this one. You just use the standard carousing rolls because, well, it's not the Shucked Oyster. This is a different place. But you have a lot of different things. Again, this is more ways in which you can get the players involved with all of the characters and the schemes and the web of intrigue. And then we had another stretch goal. Oh my gosh, we were very successful, and we very much thank our backers for this. But did you think you could get away from the Shucked Oyster even if you just left town? No, because we have Appendix W for Wilderness Encounters. And this is another D100 table, only this time you're running into the characters out in the wilderness doing weird stuff. And then finally, the final stretch goal. This was an enormous amount of work, and we were as thorough as we could possibly have been. We have the Appendices. So if you don't run Shadowdark, if you want something that is a heavier rule system, a more simulationist system, and you are a fan of Adventurer, Conqueror, King, we have a full conversion for all of the characters, all of the dungeons, all of the magic items for Adventurer, Conqueror, King system, Imperial Imprint, or a second edition. And so we've taken all of them and given them full stats and full class abilities accounted for, all of their equipment, whether they have a mount, everything according to the ACKS rules. And so it's different. Some of this stuff is different. The characters are all relatively the same, but there's an instance. You saw Coward's Bane, the sword, earlier. ACKS II does not actually support sentient weapons anymore, sentient items. So, and here's we have the dungeons, which basically the dungeon conversions here, it's going to, anything that's different, whether if it's usually monster stats, and a lot of times, honestly, the biggest conversion for ACKS was the treasure. The treasure tables are just so incompatible between these game systems that really needed to be generated according to the ACKS rules as well. So we've got all of these different dungeon encounters, magic items. In particular, Coward's Bane needed to be completely reworked, the concept for it. So it is very different, and it is still a sentient sword. We got another dungeon. Oh my gosh, so many dungeons. But Coward's Bane, in particular, we had to make a custom spell according to the custom spell rules in the ACKS II Judge's Journal, and created a new spell to go along with some of the other things that are within that sword that make it so badass. Some of them couldn't fully be converted to the full rigor of the ACKS II system, but we took inspiration from the ACKS modules AX1, where there are things that weren't quite in line with ACKS II as well, and made some we made some judgment calls on things, but it's all within the spirit of the game as well. There is a whole lot here. We also did a conversion for the cigars, And finally, at the end, if you thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like look up all those oyster modifiers and blah, 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 we have a table that just summarizes all of them that gives you a little clue as to each one. So you've got a reference here. So that's basically the entirety of the Shucked Oyster. I'm immensely proud of it. It has given us countless sessions at this point of activity in our own campaign, but it hasn't dominated our campaign. And that's exactly how we wanted it to turn out, is that this is something that comes and goes and builds an interest until your players can't ignore it. And it's an amazing amount of fun. There's also some potentially campaign-altering treasure in this book in certain dungeons. So be aware that if you bring this into your game, it's not just going to go in slightly unexpected directions. It could go very, very different. But that's pretty much the whole thing. I really hope that you take a look at this. You go to DriveThru RPG. We have this in hardcover and softcover, which, speaking of, we do have an additional version of this, though, available through Mixam. Now, Mixam, as you can see, I don't know if we can get this here. The Mixam version is thinner because the paper is thinner. However, I do think that and you can see there's a slight color shift on the cover and a little bit of an offset, just the way that the cover works, setting that up. I do think the print quality is slightly better in the Mixam version. However, it is much more expensive to produce, and Mixam does not do ebooks. So if you go the Mixam route, you can't really get the PDF with it, which is unfortunate. DriveThru, you can get the book and the PDF, but we wanted to provide the option anyway. We're also going to be putting it up on Lulu at some point and potentially Amazon KDP. But this version, the blacks are just a little deeper. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see. You can probably see there's a little bit of a shine to it. This is not glossy paper. It's got kind of a satin coating to it. So it's still completely readable. It's not going to be like I have my light is shining down on this. I can read this entirely in the light without doing any sort of magic tricks, doing this thing that we need to read it. It's a little bit nicer just because the blacks are deeper, but otherwise this is literally the same book. I expect that it's likely going to last as long or longer than the DriveThru version. It's just a slightly different feel. So we'll have links to both of those. We also have softcover versions of this from DriveThru and Mixam. I believe this is the Mixam version. Yeah, this has a kind of a satin coating, but the blacks I don't think are any deeper than the softcover from DriveThru. Anywhere that you get this, it's going to look good. It's going to feel good, and it's going to do a whole lot for your campaign. So this is kind of coming to the end of our Shucked Oyster overview here, but this is what I would consider, and obviously I am biased. I wrote the damn thing. This is a high value product. This is going to give you more hooks in a campaign and more chaos in your campaign than pretty much anything else on the market, in my humble opinion. And it has been just I can't describe how much fun that I've had playing this, and it's been more fun even to hear how other people's campaigns have turned out using it, because they're all so different, because people get interested in different things, they run into different characters, and players across groups just do wildly different stuff, and you get to role play these, and it's just an enormous amount of fun. And there's more to come in this kind of dark, surreal, nightmare, Lynchian universe. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, check it out on DriveThru RPG, check it out on Mixam, and get yourself a copy and get it to the table, because it is so much fun, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I hope that you enjoyed this video, not from Questing Beast, but from Black Lodge Games.